sort of asked me to sort of come up with a point of view on this topic. This is something I've done a lot of work on over the last few years. Does gamification work? What do I think about it? How can you use it? And this is just a sort of a bit of a 15-minute summary of my viewpoint on that. We've actually been doing about 3 or 4 years worth of investigation on this topic, and I've done about 100 experiments, a couple of large-scale international studies. I've published 4 papers, and I think I probably added up about 30 or so real gamified sort of survey projects over the last few years. And my answer to the question, does gamification work, is it can. Here's an example of one of the recent large-scale studies we did. We tested out, in this experiment, 20 different creative question approaches using wording and sort of conceptual techniques, all based around the idea of making the survey more interesting and fun to answer. We tested this out in around 15 different countries to see the impact it had in different cultures. And what we discovered was that these techniques were consistently delivering increased thought and effort from respondents in every market we tested them out. We were seeing reductions in straight lining, which is an indication of boredom. And we were also, when we actually looked at the data at a really sort of granular level, we were seeing improvements in data quality too. And that was just one large-scale experiment. Now, my answer is not effusively yes. Rather, does gamification work? I say it can, because it is very much a creative process, and I very much liken it to advertising. And ask, does advertising work? Well, yes, advertising can work, but it also can fail. Not all advertising is effective, and it's difficult often to tell which bit is effective. It's very much in the hands of the creative executor of the actual solution. And I've seen a lot of people playing around with gamification over the last few years, and I don't think that they necessarily always got it right. There's a really good example from the work that Reg Baker did, presented at the SMR Congress 2 years ago, looking at where they tried to play around with a few sort of what I might call decorative gamification techniques, where they created an avatar and delivered the survey within the framework of an avatar, and they tried to decorate some of the questions up with bits of clip art. And it really didn't demonstrate any value whatsoever, and in fact, it was among certain groups, it was considered to be just straightforwardly annoying. So I think that the primary mistake that I think that people, when you're considering gamification conceptually, is to think of it as a decorative process. It's definitely not. It's a lot more than that. The same mistake was made in the early days of PowerPoint, when we all began to start playing around with clip art and imagery and colors, and we started to use them decoratively. And over the years, we've learned to use colors and visuals to help communicate and how emotionally engage people in the right sorts of ways. And I think that we're on that learning journey with our understanding of gamification. I much prefer to think about the term copywriting in art direction, because this is more akin to what it is. You're taking a piece of communication and you're trying to work out how to emotionally engage people, how to communicate things effectively, how to draw people in, track their attention. And that is a very significant skill to deliver efficiently and effectively. The core mechanics of gamification, I think, is all about working out how to encourage people to think, and rewarding thinking processes, and how to emotionally draw people in. So it's not about decoration. That's one primary thing I want to point out. My other observation is that the maths of gamification start at -1, and by that I mean a lot of the work that I do is not perhaps in the realms of making surveys fun, but in actually making them less boring, unfortunately. But it's all in the same path. You know, you start with a boring survey, you can make it less boring, you can then make it interesting, and then you make it fun, and then you're heading that direction. But I'm afraid a lot of the work I do is very prosaic, focusing on just trying to make surveys less tedious. So, I mean, that's sort of my general point of view on gamification. I think that everyone really is interested in what particularly works and what they can take and use for themselves. And I think that I would summarize that into 3 clear areas. The first area is motivation techniques. The idea that you can use game mechanics within surveys or introducing levels of fun to help motivate people to want to answer questions. And this thinking can be applied on so many different levels. It can be applied at a whole thematic level of a survey, very much like Betty's going to show you later on. But it also can be applied at an individual question level. It's based around a thought really that respondents will do more work when there is a clear, meaningful, and ideally fun purpose to what they're doing. And I've labelled this questification. And here's an example. You're doing a survey when you're getting people to talk about this was a real survey we did internationally. We're getting people to talk about their relationship with music, and they were having to talk about their feelings towards music, how it fits into their lives. And the research company wanted us to extract a lot of information out of these people. Now, the way we motivated people to do this with a bit more effort was to ask them to imagine that they're being interviewed by a journalist and they were going to publish the results in a magazine. In actual fact, that's in a sense what they were doing with information. And we reinforced all the questions just with little bits of visual iconography to reinforce that point. Now, adding that motivationary hook increased the actual feedback count from each respondent from 200 to 300 words per respondent, 100 extra words just by adding that little bit of extra twist of motivatory mechanic. And that technique we've successfully applied on all sorts of levels in all sorts of surveys over the last few years, and it's an absolute winner. The second big area is understanding, you know, the skills of copywriting and wordplay. You know, a lot of questionnaire designs can be radically improved by improvements in how you word questions, essentially, and utilizing a more playful and more humanistic approach, which I suppose not all of this is about gamification, but it's certainly in that territory. These are what I consider the 5 most powerful techniques that I've come across when you're thinking about wording questions. Firstly, the idea of personalization. A lot of questions are very abstract, and what we found is that if you can bring a question into the world of the individual, it becomes more interesting for them to answer, and they're more people are much more interested in talking about themselves and how they interact with the world than more abstract questions like this. How much you agree or disagree with these statements becomes a lot more effective if you say how much you like these people, and you give them a statement, I like cheese or something. We found in scientific experiments, we test that out, that when you phrase questions in that way, respondents think about them more, they concentrate more, and you can actually measure the differences in performance to that question. The second thought is evoking conjecture. I mean, most games, particularly in the most primitive of games that we play, as children and so on, are all about what-if situations and imaginary processes. And the word imagine is probably the most powerful word you can use when constructing a question in a survey. And as an example, you might ask people to make a list of their favourite shops, or you could say, imagine you had your own shopping centre with just the shops you wanted in it. What shops would be in that shopping centre? Now, that is a fundamentally more, it is evoking conjecture amongst respondents. It's fundamentally more interesting for them to do. And then when you look at what they do as a result of that, they give you 4 times more feedback because it's more interesting. They reward you with more feedback if the question is interesting to answer. And this is the actual raw data from this experiment. The list group versus the second group, imagining they were designing their own perfect shopping centre. You see this, manifest improvement in feedback, 4 times more feedback in this case. The next thought is applying abstract rules and conditions to the way you write questions. The heart of all games are effectively rules that contain what you're going to do. And if you can weave a rule into a question, it often has a very powerful weapon to encourage people to think in certain ways, to stimulate them. Often you get overwhelmed with questions and you don't quite know what to answer, and rules can contain that. And a rule basically makes a question a bit more like a puzzle, and puzzles are more satisfying to answer. An example is an experiment. This is an experiment. Well, not actually. It's a real project. We asked. It was a concept screening task. We asked one group of people to just say what they liked and disliked about a product, and about 80% of people gave us an answer. But the typical answer was things like, "I like the colour." Now we changed that to name one small thing you would change about this product. Now that is a bit more of an interesting question to answer. It's a challenge to identify something. And we found that a few more people answered that question, but what was probably more significant was the quality of answers we got back. Instead of saying the colour, we got a specific intervention idea, like change the colour to red. You get more instructions out of it. So not only these techniques are about creating volume and stimulating thinking, it's about delivering more actionable insights as well with the way you word a question. This link to that is sort of setting up questions as challenges. You know, so many games are about challenging people, you know, invoking our competitive spirit. So these sorts of phrases, how many can you guess? Sketch the most expensive. Which would you bet on? You've got 1 minute to do a task. These sorts of things are very powerful tools and weapons to use to word questions. An example might be, we did an experiment. We asked people to list their favourite foods, and we got 7 foods listed. And another group, we said, imagine you had 2 minutes in a supermarket to buy all your favourite foods. What would you buy? And what you get is like, I mean, in this case, it just significant leap in feedback because it's a challenge. It's amazing how we respond to challenge in a sort of very Pavlovian way. You know, I'm walking to the car with my son, and I'm in a hurry to get to the car. And if I say to him, "Hurry up, we're in a hurry," and he'll sort of like start dragging his feet. But if I say to him, "I'll race you to the car," he goes without thinking. So we've utilised challenging protocols within surveys very successfully, particularly quizzing approaches. We've developed a whole new way of designing brand awareness studies using quizzing and quiz challenges. So instead of saying which these brands are aware of, you basically set it up as a quiz. You say, here's in this case, here's a strapline from a brand. Can you guess what brand it's associated with? And what we do is we put them under time limits, and we say the faster you answer, the more points you get. And you can get people to do this over and over again. And we give them feedback as they go along, and they get to know whether they're winning or losing. It turns the process of answering a question into a fun process. And what's fascinating, if you look at the answers and how they respond compared to a normal group of people where you ask a question without giving any sort of quizzing feedback, without the challenge elements of it. If you ask questions like, you know, which of these brands is this logo associated with, in a repetitive fashion, you notice this is the first chart here. People's thinking times quite rapidly decay as they get bored doing it. So by the end of the 10th repetition, they're spending 40% less time thinking about the answer because they're just getting bored. But when you invoke a game challenge, they're thinking about it for longer on average, and the amount of time they're thinking about it is almost index linked to how difficult the question is, not about. And so that's I think it's a lovely example of the impact that sort of thinking about surveys within a game framework can have on the effort that people put into it and the answers you get. If you look at the answers, the people who are playing the guessing game more accurately predicted the answers. Because I mean, if you think about when you're answering a survey, what brand you're aware of, what motivates you to actually give a truthful answer? Nothing really. I mean, you may as well just make up the answer. It doesn't matter. But when you're playing a game, it does matter because you're going to win or lose, and therefore we found that more people were getting it right, which, you know, I think that so this has led to a huge breakthrough in our approach to doing certain aspects of you know, things like advertising recall, anything that memory trawling type work. We're playing around with pitching them as pure play games. There was also a huge value in just adding a sense of playfulness to questions. Which brand would the Queen buy? How happy you would be to wear this brand on your T-shirt? These sorts of things. What we discovered is that they just provoke people to think. Instead of saying, "Do you like this brand?" which is such a boring question. Do you like your bank? It's a bit difficult to know whether you like your bank or not. But if I ask you, would you wear your bank on your T-shirt to go out jogging? Now you can answer that. That brings the question into your world, and it's an interesting question to answer, and you'd have a definite opinion about that. And so, being more supposed a bit more witty and thoughtful in the way your questions can often provoke more interesting answers from people. Here's an example of concept screening turned into a sort of a more witty approach, where we asked people to imagine they're playing a game where they had to judge products, and we asked them first of all to guess or decide what judge they wanted to be, and in that mindset we showed them the product as an audition conceptually. So we introduced them the product, and then we got them to talk about it as they were in the mindset of the judge. And then we got them to play a bit like a game. They then had to guess who's going to be the winner, and they had to vote off the brands and so on, or the concepts. And I can tell you the respondents absolutely loved doing this. We measured audience appreciation scores at the end of all our surveys. This survey, I've never had a survey that's had a better audience appreciation score. It scored 9.2. And when you looked at the feedback, we were getting about 50% more comments to compare to a straight questioning approach. And what was really more powerful was the diversity and imaginative nature of the feedback. There were a lot more often acerbic and a bit more rude, perhaps, which is all valuable. It opened up people to say different types of things, and allowing people to pick what type of judge allowed them to sort of take a more of personality, and we were able to sort of look at the differences between the nice judges and the nasty judges and what they said, and looked at sort of commonalities. A wonderful example of how you could, by making a questionnaire more interesting and a fun experience, you can improve the feedback. So I realise I'm a bit running short of time. I'll just move on to the final point about visualization. I think that we, as researchers, we don't really probably understand how important visuals are. So the way, very text-driven questionnaires mostly we deliver back to the marketplace. Pictures are really powerful weapons. The way you design questions can have a really big, tremendous impact on the quality of feedback. For example, if I ask you what foods you hate to eat, if I just visualize someone expressing that emotion, we found that we get more answers. I ask you to imagine answering this question repetitively for a whole load of different types of product, or this question. Now, this is a lovely example of deborification. I mean, it might necessarily be more fun to answer this way, but it's certainly less stressful and more, with a color coordination of the option choices and the use of the iconography for the brand descriptor, it's easier for the respondents to process that information. And I think that a lot of the misnomer about the use of visuals, and particularly iconography, is that it's considered to be decorative, and in fact it actually has a very important scientific role, iconography, in question design. Take this example here. Imagine you're evaluating a whole series of books with these option choices, not heard this book, and what happens is that respondents have to encode that list in their working memory to answer that question effectively, which is hard work, and they can't remember all the option choices, and so they constantly have to reread them as they go through a list to clarify it. But using visuals and icons can help encode what that means very simply, and therefore you can process that choice a lot easier. Once you've done it once or twice, it becomes easier. The icons help you to basically put less load on your working memory, and we found that when you use icons like this in a repetitive way, you get a more consistent, less chaotic, less straight-lined answers. And so, that's a good example of, the role and importance of visuals in surveys is not just decorative, it's about what they can deliver in terms of improved efficiency of a survey. So, in summary, I would say gamification can work, but don't get fixated with the term. I'd much rather you expand your thinking out to think about a survey as a piece of creative communication, and focus on how to motivate. Try to think like a copywriter as you write your questions, to think about how you're going to emotionally engage respondents. Invest in good visuals and design, and really understand the science of what you're doing, and you know, so you're using these techniques in the right sort of way. So that's my session over. I appreciate I've run over my allocated time. I'm sorry about that.